Hi, you're very welcome to today's workshop, which will specifically focus on exercise for osteoporosis if you have it, but also just good bone health if you don't have any clinical conditions. But aging and things like inactivity and the menopause threaten our bone health. So regardless, this workshop is for everybody to maintain good bone health as we age. So there are three key things that affect bone health, and the first would be hormones. So this could be a lecture in itself, but I specifically need to mention women here. So once we reach perimenopause and menopause and we start losing estrogen, we actually have a 5-year period of rapid bone loss. So it's no coincidence that 1 in every 2 of us get osteopenia or osteoporosis once we hit that stage in life, because estrogen normally helps to keep bone health good, and it helps us to have good, strong bones with good bone density. So as soon as we start to lose it, we start to get problems. Now there's plenty we can do about this, so it's important to note. Nutrition, of course, is really important, and for example, to make sure that you have adequate vitamin D levels. And in recent years in Ireland, if you go for a blood test, just full blood profile with the GP, they're starting to test for vitamin D. And if not, ask them to do vitamin D, because we are mostly quite deficient in it. So it's called like the sunshine vitamin, because generally we can get a lot of vitamin D from sun shining on our skin, which of course unfortunately can be limited in Ireland. So in terms of vitamin D, it's in terms of supplements, actually, from kind of Halloween, like that late October up to St. Patrick's Day, it is actually recommended for adults in Ireland to take a vitamin D supplement. But again, it would be good to have those tested and just see where you're at. And of course, calcium is also very important as well. So nutrition is very, very important from the point of view of good bone health. But one of the things that's crucially important is mechanical strain. And what I mean by that is actually appropriate stresses and strains on your bones and joints. Because if we don't stress and strain them, we don't stimulate them to adapt and get stronger. So that can be a big problem. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more now. Okay, so in terms of mechanical strain, so things like squats and lunges, any type of body weight resistance training, or resistance training holding, using bands or holding weights or whatever it is, that's all important to stimulate bone mass, as is impact. So for example, walking. So when you walk, the force of gravity is exerting down on top of your bones and joints. And this is particularly good actually to develop bone mass in the hips, which are a major site for fracture as we get older, and particularly for women once we go through the menopause. So we need that mechanical strain. It stimulates little cells called osteoblasts in our bone, and it tells them to lay down more bone. So if we don't do that, for example, if we sit a lot all day, if we have a sedentary job where we're sitting, and then we're sitting to eat, and then we're lying down in bed, like we could be basically sedentary for 16, 17, 18 hours a day. And that level of physical inactivity is detrimental for our health in general, but it's definitely detrimental to bone, because you're not giving your bones any stimulus to grow and get stronger. And particularly periods of like bed rest, or particularly if an older person ends up in a hospital bed for a period of time. And you can see there in the bottom right hand side, so we work with the European Space Agency on their bed rest studies. So we take groups of young, healthy, fit males, and they actually go to bed for 60 days. And they have to stay in bed for 60 days. They can't get up. They must have one shoulder in contact with the bed at all times. They eat in bed. They do their group activities in bed. They do everything in bed. And basically what that is it replicates the conditions in space. So it allows us to study what happens to the human body in a simulated space environment, and then it's our job to come up with exercise and dietary things that will basically keep people healthy. So for space, it means astronauts can do further space exploration because we're keeping them healthier. But for us down on Earth, it means that we get to study the impact of physical inactivity on the body, and we get to come up with effective countermeasures. Now, you might say, well, I won't be going to bed for 60 days, but the reality is our lifestyles are so sedentary at the moment that the same thing is happening to us all of the time. It's just at a slower rate. So physical inactivity is a massive problem. So these guys lose a lot of muscle in 2 months. They lose a lot of bone. Their blood sugar levels start to rise, their cholesterol level starts to rise, their fitness goes down through the floor, and you know, it affects psychology and all sorts of stuff. Now, I will say, obviously, for ethical reasons, everyone is rehabilitated afterwards. But the point is, while that's an extreme model, it's happening to all of us daily if we're very, very sedentary, and it's bad news for bones. Okay, so a little note here on bone physiology. So basically our bones continuously undergo a process called remodeling. And this means that they're always in a cycle of bone breakdown followed by bone build-up. And there are little cells called osteoclasts that are involved in the breakdown of bone, and other cells called osteoblasts that are involved in the building up of bone. So obviously, if we want more bone, particularly as we get older or as we go through menopause, it's these little osteoblasts that we want to stimulate. And at certain times in life, this remodeling process changes. So when we're young, the build-up, of course, is greater than the breakdown because we're trying to lay down bone. And this is why it is so important that young people are active. Like, they're supposed to do 60 minutes of activity every day. And I suppose in the world we live in at the moment of sedentary behaviour and computer games and all sorts of stuff, it's a major issue for health, but also particularly for bones. And in older age, of course, breakdown is greater than build up for those who are sedentary, but there's a lot we can do about this. As I mentioned, the breakdown is magnified with the menopause when we lose estrogen, but very importantly, you need to know that physical activity, so like impact stuff like walking and particularly resistance training, so your squats, your lunges, lifting weights, resistance bands, things like that, they are essential to stimulate osteoblasts. So they play such a crucial role in maintaining bone health as we get older. Okay, so we've spent a number of weeks talking about the FIT principles for health. So the types and amounts of exercise that are important for health. Today, I'm specifically focusing on bone health. So to be honest, they're fairly similar to the general recommendations, but there are a couple of key differences. And if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis or a family history of it, or if you're in perimenopause or menopause or after menopause, you really need to pay attention to this because, you know, osteoporosis and osteopenia are can be very debilitating. They are one of the biggest threats to well-being and functional health, to particularly women as we get older, and it's a serious thing. So, you know, it's important to kind of pay attention to this and be aware of it. So again, back to our aerobic exercise like walking. The recommendation is 3 to 5 days per week, 30 minutes per day. So that's the same as the recommendations for health. But the important add-on here would be weight bearing. So for example, the walking, because that's proven to lay down bone in the areas we tend to lose it most, particularly the hips. The opposite to that is non-weight bearing, which would be things like cycling. So when you're sitting on a bike, the bike is taking your weight, and you don't have as much force exerting down on your bones and joints. Now, of course, non-weight bearing is very appropriate for various reasons for people who have different injuries and things like that, and you'll still get benefit from it, but if you want the most benefit, it should be weight bearing. The second type is resistance training. So any type of strength training, like the body weight stuff you're doing with us in class, or adding in water bottles for like bicep curls and things like that, bands, free weights. And the recommendation for health is 2 to 3 days per week. But for bone health, if you specifically need to take care of your bones, it's at least 3 days, where you're targeting all of the muscle groups in the body, basically the exact same as the classes we do with you. And you'd need to be doing it 3 days a week if possible. Now, this is if you really need to maintain your bone mass or indeed stimulate bone growth. So that's a difference there. Balance, of course, becomes very, very important if you have either of these conditions, because what you want to do at all costs is avoid a fall. Because if you have osteoporosis and it's bad, a fall could mean fractures and breaks for you, which of course will mean hospital stays, immobility, further physical inactivity, and it's just an absolute disaster for health and for bones and wellness and mental health and functionality and everything. So we want to avoid those at all costs. If your balance is good, you're looking at 3 days a week. Now, this is only for 5 minutes. Like, think of the balance work you do with us in class. It's only for a few minutes, and that's your balance work covered. But if your balance is really poor and you feel like even in walking you're not very stable, I would be doing 5 minutes every day of the week. So you can do it at your kitchen sink, you can do it while you're brushing your teeth, you can do it on everywhere and anywhere, just for a few minutes a day. Okay, so balance becomes really, really important if you have osteoporosis or osteopenia. And the final type of exercise, as you'll know from the weeks of listening to these workshops, is flexibility or stretching. And there is a difference here, because the health recommendations would be a couple of days per week. But when it comes to osteoporosis and osteopenia, it's almost daily. And that is because movement and mobility and stretching is really, really important for joint health. So if you have pain and stiffness in joints, if you have things like arthritis, osteoporosis, flexibility becomes very, very important. And by you moving the joints through their full range of motion, it can stimulate the release of fluid into the joint. It's called synovial fluid. It protects and cushions the joint. It gives it nutrition. And for osteoporosis as well, it's really, really good in terms of reducing pain and stiffness and increasing your mobility and things like that. So these are the recommendations. There are 2 or 3 key differences from the health recommendations, but basically you're doing all of these in your classes with us. So they're the types of things that we would recommend that you keep doing moving forward. Okay, so to help you with this, we're just going to send a sample circuit class for someone who has osteoporosis and osteopenia. Now, you will recognise that this is quite similar to the classes you do with us, because we've designed the classes in a way that they take all the boxes for health and they generally take all of the boxes for clinical conditions. But this is just if you wanted to print off something that you can have it for yourself. And in fact, for one of our previous programs, John had created this for us. So if you see at the top there, you have, as always, do a warm-up for 10 or 12 minutes like you always do in class with us. So start with your mobility work and then start with your gentle marching on the spot and those types of things. And then you move into your main phase. So just to take you through this, so there are 11 exercises, and the way John has done it is they alternate between aerobic, which you need to do as we've just covered, and then also crucially strength. So the first one is aerobic, the second one is strength, the third one is aerobic, number 4 is strength, 5 is aerobic, 6 is strength, 7 is actually aerobic and strength, 8 is strength, 9 is aerobic, 10 is strength, and 11 is aerobic. And really quickly, how you know the difference is, the aerobic ones will, when you're doing them, you will start to notice that your breathing rate becomes heavier. So the aerobic ones really challenge your heart and your cardiovascular system. So when you start breathing heavier and you know, working harder and kind of sweating, then you know you're in your aerobic zone. The strength stuff, for example, the wall press up, is where you do an action and you repeat it. So there's a force exerting on the muscle. In this case, it would be your shoulders and the backs of your arms, which we call your triceps. And you do the exercise a number of times. So you might do 20 repetitions in a minute. So that's the difference. Okay, so that'll take those boxes for aerobic and strength. And to finish then, you have a few simple balance exercises. As I mentioned, you can do them at your kitchen sink. You can do them while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. You can do them while you're brushing your teeth. Just get them into your day if you can for a few minutes. The core work is really important too, so there's some exercises there. And then you'll finish on flexibility, and that little routine there, as you can see, stretches the muscles in your chest, your back, your quads, which are the front of your thighs basically, your groin, your hamstrings are the back of your thighs, and then your calf. And it only takes a few minutes, but it's really, really important for everybody, but especially if you have osteoporosis and osteopenia. And finally, we have a few special exercise considerations. So if you have like osteoporosis, and it could be in different places, but you do want to avoid very explosive movements. Okay, so it wouldn't be a good idea to be jumping up and down off a height, for example. Now, if I give you an exercise related one in a gym, that would be like a box step where you'd be jumping up and down off a height. Probably not something you're going to do in daily life, but I just have to mention it because while we're supposed to have impact on our joints, that would just be quite severe. And do walk if you can, as I mentioned, because it strengthens your hip bone mass. And do use stairs, but as tolerated. So if there's pain or if there's weakness or if you're not terribly fit, you might need to do them in short bouts, like a couple of minutes here and there, as opposed to trying to go for a 30-minute session. So again, if you do have severe osteoporosis, jumping, running and jogging mightn't be the best option for you. Walking will give you all of the benefits that you need. If you have osteoporosis in your spine, which is quite common because it contains a lot of soft bone and it's one of the sites that is prone to osteoporosis, particularly for women in the menopause, you need to just be a bit careful with spine care. So when we're doing tummy exercises or abdominal exercises, you might have noticed that we don't do anything in the classes like the traditional sit-ups where you're lying on the floor and then you curl your whole self up to touch your toes. There's a lot of movement on the spine there, and it's not good if you have osteoporosis in your spine. What we will do instead is we'll do things like planks, the front planks, the side planks, and lots of other ways to protect the spine. Of course, at this stage, having done a number of weeks of classes, you'll be familiar with those, but we don't like traditional sit-ups, okay? Avoid excessive trunk flexion, which is kind of bending over, and especially if you were carrying a weight. So if you're carrying stuff and you're bent over, there's a huge amount of pressure on your spine. So it would be very important, and this is why we focus on leg strength, that you're squatting when you're lifting. So you're using your legs, your back is straight, your core is tight, and you're letting the legs do the work. So just be careful with that. And it's excessive trunk twisting, which would be turning side to side, fine in a controlled manner like you do in class, but not like really fast and kind of uncontrolled movements. And don't load your spine with weight. So if you have osteoporosis in your spine, it's not a good idea to be lifting very heavy things over your head. And even if we think of a situation where we're lifting weights, and it's a shoulder press, so basically you press the weight from your shoulder straight up overhead. Yes, do it, but you might just do it without no weight or maybe a water bottle. Okay, so you wouldn't start loading massive weights for that exercise if you have osteoporosis in your spine. Avoid things with a high fall potential like trampolines, slippy floors, ice and snow in the winter. Just be really careful. Treadmills where you have a chance of falling, you're much better off to walk on solid ground. And then rough terrain, so if you're not used to it and your balance is poor, like off-road walks, just be mindful of those. We want to avoid falls, but the biggest way you're going to avoid falls is get your legs as strong as possible with your strength work. If you are severely limited by pain, definitely have a consultation with your GP first. Okay, last slide, we're nearly there. So you do need to be consistent with your training. If you want to be healthy and well, training is no longer optional. It's essential and it needs to be part of your week. Your flexibility and your mobility becomes very important. So that's every day for a few minutes, followed swiftly by strength and balance. 5 minutes of balance every day, your strength work 3 times a week, and then whatever time or energy you have left is the aerobic stuff, the weight bearing stuff like walking. Okay, so that would be the sequence of importance. So don't just keep doing aerobic stuff because that's what you always did, because you love to go for walks. If you have these conditions and you need to take care of your bones, you have to rearrange your training priority. Okay, and if you need more information on flexibility and balance and strength and aerobic, I'll just remind you to look back at the first 4 weeks of workshops, because I detail them much more at that time. And then finally, I'm just going to bring up a slide on your custom 7-day training diary if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis and you'd like to monitor yourself and see, are you hitting your targets? So here it is. You can see there are 7 boxes. So daily for flexibility and mobility stuff, 3 days a week for resistance. Balance is 7 days a week, but remember you're looking at 3 or 4 minutes, that's it. And whatever time you have left then is aerobic, but particularly weight bearing. Don't forget to take a rest day. You don't need to rest from balance work or flexibility. They're not stressful on the body, but you would need a rest day from either strength or aerobic in your week, just to allow you to recover. So that's it. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you find the resources helpful. We'll email you the circuit and the training diary, and thank you very much for listening.